Hello, and welcome to Talk to Downtown. My name is Courtney Wood. I'm the Economic Development Director for the Downtown Stockton Alliance, which is a 501c6 nonprofit property-based business improvement district serving downtown Stockton. This webinar series is intended to connect our business owners, property owners, visitors, and residents with the organizations, people, and resources who can help them address issues which are of top concern to them. Today, we have special guest, Tristan Osborn. He is a senior planner for advanced planning at the City of Stockton. And we're going to be learning today all about what advanced planning is and about new zoning changes coming to Stockton and coming to downtown specifically. We'll begin by having Tristan share a little bit about himself and his role at the City of Stockton. Then I will go ahead and ask him my list of questions I've outlined for him. And at the end, we'll open it up to the viewers to go ahead and ask your questions. So if you do have a question along the way, just be sure to type it in as a comment on Facebook. All right. So Tristan, welcome. Thank you for being our guest. Can you please share a little bit about yourself and your role at the City of Stockton?
Sure, happy to. Thank you for having me. I'm a land use planner with kind of a background in urban design and community revitalization. I've been working in Stockton for the better part of the last 15 years, both as with the city and as a private consultant, focusing mostly downtown, waterfront, and South Stockton. About 2 years ago, I came back to the city. I was here during the redevelopment days. I'm in the advanced planning division, which is part of community development. We're a little bit different than the current planning division, which is what most of the audience may be familiar with. Those folks help process entitlements, use permits, that sort of thing. They're the front counter staff. Whereas advanced planning, we focus more on long range visioning, some of the master planning and concept designs. We look at things such as annexation, some of the more wonky stuff that comes through community development department. So that's my role here, just help out with the special project stuff.
Thank you. You were sharing before the live that you've been doing this for about 2 years.
Yeah, I came back to the city in August of 20. I mentioned before, I was over in redevelopment and economic development in years prior, but came back to the city here August 20.
All right. Awesome. And you kind of shared with us a little bit about advanced planning. Can you share a little bit about the overarching goals of the full planning department at the City of Stockton?
Sure. So we're comprised of engineers, current planning, advanced planning. We have fire safety here. So we have a lot of different folks in community development. And, we really focus on how does the city grow, how we can help the city grow. We obviously have some goals around safety, protecting public safety and making sure buildings are safe and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, we're focused on helping the city of Stockton grow and thrive.
Great. And your division, the advanced planning, is looking to the future. You're looking about upcoming changes, development, changes in zoning, things like that. Is there anything else that you can share with us about advanced planning?
Sure. We're a small team. There's 3 of us. We have 2 senior planners and a planning manager. But we're a feisty division, so we're really pushing ahead on a lot of efforts. We'll probably get into this more later, but we're focusing. Although we have a housing division under the economic development department, we also have a kind of a housing slant over in advanced planning, where we look at state housing law, how to implement that through our development code. How do we help permit ADUs, that sort of thing. So we're working on a housing element, which some people may have worked on in the past. We have cycles of the housing element update. We have a housing action plan, which is pretty bold for a municipality, but it's really a toolkit so we can help encourage housing production and incentivize it. What are the, it's not a document to sit on a shelf, as they say, but it's really meant to be an implementable plan, hence the action plan. And we're also working on some neighborhood revitalization and planning efforts. So those are just some of our upcoming projects, along with the development code overhaul, which some folks in the audience may be interested in. We started that back in the fall, and over the next year and a half, we're really going to be doing a top to bottom overhaul and retooling of our development code so that we can make it a little more modern, a little more contemporary, and work better for folks.
Great. So a focus on housing, focusing on bringing in more dwelling units in our community, and zoning changes and code changes. Is there anything that you think people would be surprised to know about the planning department?
Yeah, we don't have all the answers. You know, a lot of people think that you know, it's all written down somewhere, and you know, we have a great staff here, really hardworking staff, and so if we don't have the answer, we're going to find it. And you know, we get questions from the whole gamut. We do referrals to other agencies. You know, people have property that aren't part of our jurisdiction, or people are asking about changes that happened back in the, you know, 60s or the 70s, and so we may not have it right away, but we're going to go dig it up. We're going to find it, because you know, there's a lot of records, but there's a lot of different places we need to look for those answers sometimes. So it may take us a little bit of time, but you know, it's a bit of a treasure hunt sometimes for us.
Yeah, especially depending on who was keeping the records, I'm sure.
Yeah,
It's like, all
exactly.
right, digging through, past information. And can you tell us in your own words, why is your work so important for our community? Like, why is this so essential for us?
Sure. You know, I think it really comes down to creating a thriving, healthy, you know, sustainable Stockton, you know, and we really want to focus on, you know, the safety is kind of the core value, the foundation of the work that we do in planning. But we also, you know, we really want to support the community in its efforts. It's about more than zoning codes and development standards. We really want to figure out how to connect the dots and connect the pieces to help Stockton thrive, you know, and that's everything from buildings to bike lanes to parks to programs to working with community partners. It's a planners by nature. We're kind of in an umbrella role, where we're the, you know, jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing is the, you know, what you hear in planning school. And it really, we have to step back and be able to kind of do some of the silo busting and be able to connect different departments and community members and nonprofits to the business community, to the housing developers, to the new shop owner who's coming into town. So it's a really, we take a pretty holistic approach on how we can help the city thrive.
Amazing. And you personally, what kind of programs and projects do you oversee as a part of this?
Sure. So we'll get into it later, but the land use inconsistency update, which is a fancy name for kind of our rezoning project, I took that over when I came back to the city. So it's been close to it's been over a 2-year effort, close to 2 years for me. That went to council last night. It was approved 6-1. So what that means is, you know, the city did some rezoning efforts, to help encourage more investment, some more flexibility for most owners, and that's been my main project. I'm also leading the neighborhood planning efforts that we talked about, which is focused on 3 neighborhoods, to try and encourage housing production. So Cabral neighborhood downtown, Little Manila and Gleason Park is the second neighborhood, and then the South Airport corridor, down by the fairgrounds is kind of the third neighborhood that we're doing more intense planning and analysis, talking to community members, figuring out what makes the neighborhood tick, and then how we can support housing and figure out what those barriers to housing are in those neighborhoods. So that's something that now that the rezoning effort is wrapping up, we'll really be kicking that into high gear in the coming months.
Great. Just something that's making me a little curious based upon what you just shared is for the type of residential projects that you're working with, do you know, are those going to be like market rate or mixed, low income, affordable housing and market rate? Or do you have any say in that part of it?
Sure. You know, we look at it and we kind of, you know, we obviously will do an analysis of what's needed, what's there, that kind of thing. But our role is really to try and get the sites as close to shovel ready as we can. So whether that's some sort of permit streamlining, doing a phase 1 environmental, analysis to see if the soil is clean or not, figuring out what the infrastructure looks like. So we're really just trying to get for the most part, vacant lots, trying to get them as close to development ready as we can. At that point, it's really up to the market and the development community to figure out what's going to pencil there most effectively, which will depend, of course, on timing, construction, materials pricing, availability of labor, grant programs, if it is some sort of affordable housing. So a lot of different factors go into what type of housing and income levels are going in.
Great. Thank you for asking that question or answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So is there a question that you are just always asked, or is there a most common question you're asked in your division, and how do you answer it?
Sure. The easily the most common question we get is, what can I build on my property? What can I do with it? And of course, every property is different, but it really, our starting point is what's your general plan land use designation and what's your zone, and those are similar, they're related, but that's where we start. So we start at essentially what's your zoning, what's there now, what part of town are you in, and whether you're in the city. That's happens more often than you think. We get folks that are out in the county or in other cities talking to us, and so we'll refer them out from there.
Oh, wow, interesting. And right now, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities for advanced planning, and also some of the biggest challenges that you guys are facing?
Sure. I think that the biggest opportunity probably lies in housing, because there's so much money coming down from the feds and the state in terms of encouraging housing and helping to support housing, because there is such a crisis right now around that. And so we're really doing our best to try and capitalize on that, move quickly, and tee up programs that will help get that money, get it flowing, and start supporting housing through that. I think our biggest challenge, which will be sound pretty familiar probably to most folks on this live stream, is staffing. We're struggling to retain staff. It's a tough labor market right now, and so we're figuring out ways to supplement that with cross training with other divisions, other folks in the city, other community partners, relying somewhat on adjunct private consultants to help support Stockton staff, and obviously looking at recruitment and retention efforts to try and bring in more staff to the planning department.
Okay, so you're having an issue maybe finding the right people, recruiting people, keeping them, working for your department. Does that sound like what you were just sharing?
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge that a lot of organizations through a lot of industries and a lot of geographies are struggling with right now. So it's something we're of course spending a lot of time on, all the way from managers here in CDD all the way up to, I'm sure the city manager's office are looking at how we can grow our talent and keep the good folks here that we have.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's a common issue for employers. Okay, so let's dive a little bit into zoning and your big project that you were sharing about already. I know you've been working on it for quite a while. You were making zoning changes to the entire city, but specifically to downtown. A lot of it is focused in downtown. Can you give us a brief overview of why is zoning so important, and how does zoning impact economic development?
Sure. So zoning, in kind of its simplest form, really regulates what can get built where and how big. And so for downtown, obviously, it's our most intense growth area of the city. It's where we have our high rises and our most intense development. And so through the changes we proposed, we're trying to encourage more flexibility, some more relaxed standards that help support that kind of development. So an example would be, reducing some parking standards so that when you have a small lot downtown and you need to capitalize on as much of that land as you can, what we call coverage, you're able to do that without having to try and worry about fitting in surface parking, which takes up a huge amount of area, or figuring out how to finance some sort of structured parking, which becomes really expensive. So a lot of our zoning update changes have been on the periphery of downtown. So over by Cabral Station, West Fremont, in the North Shore, down in Liberty Square neighborhood, which is actually south of the crosstown. So it's areas typically outside of the central parking district where that can be, on-site parking can be a real hindrance to development.
Mm-hmm.
I may have missed some of your question there, so if you have some follow-up.
Oh, no worries.
Feel free.
Yeah, so in your, according to your perspective, what makes zoning so important for economic development?
Gotcha. It can really make or break a deal. And that's, because we have, so how it works is going back to that question earlier, what can I build on my property? What can I do there? Once we look up the zoning, we have a table here at the city that has a column for each zoning district in the city. And then the rows are basically land use types, which are everything from townhomes to restaurants to office buildings to tow yards. There's a couple hundred different uses. And we basically go through that and say, okay, which uses are allowed in which zones? And, it seems like kind of a minor thing. It's a little table in our development code, but that really impacts what you're able to put on that property. And, what level of review is required, whether it's something you come in, you submit your application, go through basic checks, and you're good to go. Or if it's something that needs to go all the way up to the planning commission for a public hearing. So we have different levels of review for different types of projects, depending which zone they're in. And so that can really have an impact, good or bad, depending how restrictive we are, how supportive we are of different uses. And we try and be, that's of course a living, breathing document that's updated every so often. But we do try and be responsive to the community and listen to them, because things change. We have definitions of those uses, those rows, that can be a bit antiquated, or maybe aren't reflective of things like, you hear about ghost kitchens, or, TNCs like Uber and Lyft, and things in our development code that we haven't, it hasn't caught up to how quickly our economy and our world's evolving. And so we need to be able to adjust those and make tweaks, and sometimes even make interpretations of our code to accommodate these new uses or new concepts that are being proposed by folks.
Got it. Trying to catch up with, new things that are trending, new things that are being built, and making sure that we can accommodate that in the types of land use that we have. All right, interesting. Okay, can you share with us now about these new zoning changes? What exactly were you proposing? What are these changes that you've been working on that were just approved, and how will they impact downtown specifically?
Sure. So for the downtown area, the zoning changes that we mostly proposed were a conversion to CD zoning, which is commercial downtown, far and away the most flexible zoning district in the city. It really has a lot of latitude in what kind of uses you can propose on your property, what you can do with it. As I mentioned earlier, it was some neighborhoods, particularly kind of the north shore of the waterfront, over by the railroad tracks near the Cabral Station, a little bit of the south shore. Those are the parts of the downtown core that still had industrial zoning. And so what we proposed is converting that industrial to commercial uses. And particularly by the railroad tracks, how we did that, I'll try and not get too technical, but we understand that they've been industrial for generations, those properties, and they're going to continue being industrial. And we aren't in the business of shutting down anybody or asking them to move. This is all about future development. So, hey, you've got an industrial property, you're operating, that's awesome. We want the jobs, you're contributing to Stockton's economy, that's fantastic. Keep doing your thing as long as you want. At the point in time when you're ready to go commercial or make a change, we want to encourage that. And because we understand, particularly going from industrial to commercial can be a really big leap, we figured out a way to do a little bit of a stepping stone, which is called an overlay. So essentially last night, even though the zoning changed to commercial, so that property owner now has the ability to do commercial uses such as a bank, a restaurant. Our commercial zones in Stockton actually allow high density housing. We could do apartments. They have all these commercial type uses that they can do, but we also floated an industrial overlay on top. So although it's not every industrial use in the city, it's kind of considered extra light industrial stuff that could be compatible with kind of the vision for downtown. And so as a property owner, it's a really great spot to be in. You get to keep operating your existing industrial business. And when you're ready, if you have a buyer or you want to redevelop your property, you're able to look at this whole suite of commercial options. And then you have a number of industrial options as well. So it's incredibly flexible. It's a great spot to be in. So those are the kind of things that we're doing through this rezoning effort, is trying to say, hey, we aren't going to allow anything and everything on any property, of course. We have safety goals and need to make sure we don't have heavy industrial next to schools, that kind of thing. But we are looking at how can we be as flexible as we can and still meet our other obligations and goals as a municipality and, kind of keeper of community safety. So.
Okay, amazing. So you're really expanding what these properties can be used for, beyond industrial, you're bringing in that element And the areas that you were sharing, you were talking about, is it the North Shore that you were sharing about?
The North Shore is a little specific. They have a similar setup. It's
Okay.
not quite as doesn't have quite as much flexibility on the industrial side because
Mhm.
it's so close to the ballpark and the hotel and the waterfront. And it's also within a design district that's been there since the 70s, and which is something we're looking at making some modifications to as part of that development code overhaul I mentioned earlier, which is where
Mhm.
we take our Title 16 and top to bottom overhaul of that. But because of those restrictions that are in place from that overlay, we had to treat that particular neighborhood a little bit differently.
Okay. So then which areas is it going to be the Cabral Station area then and the South Shore that you're mostly talking about?
Yeah, so that commercial industrial overlay where you kind of get a little bit of both,
Yeah.
or you get all the commercial and a little bit of industrial. Yeah, Cabral Station near the UP tracks, both sides of it. There's a lot of properties down by Mormon Slough, getting a little further south, and then a handful of properties over on West Charter as well. So those are basically properties that were industrial. The city recommended to change to commercial. Let's figure out how we can kind of soften that blow a little bit and give them some more options.
Great. Can you share, just in case anyone isn't aware, what does commercial downtown, that designation include in terms of use types?
There are something like 130 different uses. I will pull up a handful of them for you guys so you can kind of get a sense of
Sure,
what
maybe
them.
just like the most common ones or something. Awesome.
Sure, yeah, offices, apartments, entertainment districts. Would I actually be able to share my screen real quick?
Definitely.
Okay. That might be, it'll be a lot, that might be a little more tangible for folks.
Yeah.
So here's that table I was talking about that's buried in our development code. It's called table 2-2 if you're ever in here at the front counter and are wondering how we do this. But you can see these columns are different zones in the city. So residential medium, residential high, commercial neighborhood, commercial downtown, industrial general, port, different, all sorts of different districts. And these rows, these are different land uses. So what you do is you go to CD and you can see community gardens, let's see, market gardens, urban farms. You can do business support services, offices, obviously something you see a lot of. You see less in the industrial heading, of course, but there are some such as fabric manufacturing, cannabis testing labs, that sort of thing. As you get down into recreation, education, public assembly, you can have auditoriums, meeting halls, clubs and lodges, different types of schools. You can't have equestrian facilities. You know that clearly isn't a good match.
Hopefully not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So as you can see, a bunch of residential. Those are the types of things you can do. You know, essentially, it's anything. The stuff you can't do is heavy industrial and then things that take up those large spaces that don't make sense for downtown, like equestrian facilities.
Amazing. Thank you. That's
Mm-hmm.
such a broad range of just things that people can do when it's designated as commercial downtown.
Yeah, it's incredibly
I love
flexible.
that. So what makes you excited about these changes? You know, what do you hope this is going to help facilitate in downtown Stockton?
Sure. You know, I think we can all agree the economy is in a bit of a, there's some question marks right now. And so anything that we as a city can do to kind of help prime the pump a little bit and help downtown reinvestment, revitalization, infill housing, those are all huge priorities for us at the planning department. And so whatever we're able to do in terms of removing barriers and giving folks the flexibility to respond to the market, you know, and what works right now and what doesn't, we know that's changing practically daily, you know, in terms of what you can make to pencil or what, you know, potential tenant comes through, you know, if you're a broker, comes through your office. We know it's, you know, can oftentimes be really tough to find the right tenant at the right time. And so being able to build in that flexibility and at the same time have more uses that have fewer restrictions and fewer hurdles and a shorter processing time here at the city. We want to help that out as much as we can as well. So the more things we can put under a P, which is permitted, which is essentially fill out your paperwork, quick reviews, and you're good to go, as opposed to going through that lengthier process to get up to Planning Commission. The more things we can front load, the better.
Amazing. So it's really going to fuel economic development. It's really going to, give people that flexibility that they need to hopefully serve the market. Awesome. Okay, so as far as these changes are concerned, how did you kind of decide to take this project on? How did the need for this kind of get to your guys' ears? How did you hear about it and decide to do this?
Sure. So the main purpose of this is implementing the general plan, which was approved back in 2018, but had been worked on for the years leading up to that. The general plan is the vision document for the whole city. It's kind of the policy document that guides, everything from safety in schools to land use decisions to air quality, environmental justice efforts. And in the general plan, you have a designation similar to zoning, but a little bit different for each property in the city. So commercial here, industrial over there, residential over there. It's a bit more broad. It doesn't have the parking standards and the height requirements and things that you have in the zoning code. It's more of an umbrella designation. Under each of those general plan land use designation types, you have zoning districts that match up with that. And for a long time, the city of Stockton didn't need to have those match up. So you might have a residential general plan and industrial zoning. And it made it confusing when you're trying to get permits, go through our process. It made us hard for the city to make certain required findings we have to do when processing. The state of California eventually came in and said, hey, you guys need to make sure these match up. It's because we're a charter city, which is a bit different than most cities in California. So that was kind of the main kicking off point of this effort, was implementing the general plan. We changed a bunch of land use designations through that 2-3 year process. Now we're changing the zoning to kind of match up with that general plan. So that's where it started. And in terms of getting feedback, in terms of feedback, we obviously looked at the general plan. What are the goals? What are the policies of that? We talked to the community. We noticed property owners. We had workshops. We did study sessions with the Planning Commission. So it was kind of a multi-pronged approach to get feedback and incorporate that feedback into the effort. And it was very iterative. We had a series, we would go through each and every single parcel, look at our recommendations, update some of those, get phone calls from property owners. Oh, we didn't know about this planned project you had, or we didn't know that the property was sold because that wasn't reflected in the property tax record. So, oh, you're a new owner and now you want to do something different. Okay, let's talk about that and figure out if we can make it work. And so there was a lot of those conversations, meetings with non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, housing developers, chambers. We met with a lot of different folks over the course of this effort, in addition to having, giving people as much access to staff as they could have.
Amazing. So you really worked with the individual, property owners, hearing, here's what they're using it for, here's what they're hoping to use their land for. And that's really, really nice to know. What other methods did you guys use for public outreach or public input?
Sure. For projects of this scale, we always develop a public engagement plan, at the onset of the project. And that was before the pandemic. And so there was all of these workshops planned in neighborhoods and districts. And of course, we had to pivot from that, like everyone. And when I came on board, I put together a new plan that was kind of a two-pronged approach. It was more of your traditional outreach, which for us is notices in the records, sending out mailers to property owners, doing some in-person workshops when we're able to, but also taking a bit more of a technological approach where we would have, we did a couple workshops on, digitally early on in the fall of 2020. We set up a dedicated phone line and email for this project where we had staff on the other end, primarily myself, but the other folks in my division kind of monitored that if I wasn't around. We eventually implemented office hours, which was 11 to 2 every Tuesday, Thursday. People could come into the counter and just know that there was going to be somebody here that they could talk to. So we tried a bunch of different stuff. We did press releases, we did emails, update our website, all the kind of, typical stuff you would expect. And then we did a bunch of cold calling. We just even, you know, we tried to focus on impacted property owners. There's a couple, you know, a few thousand at the end of the day that were impacted by this out of 83,000. But, you know, we also just cold called some organizations that we knew might get questions as we sent out mailers to property owners. We knew that, you know, the community leaders out there might have a resident say, hey, you know, what the heck is this card I got in the mail? What does this mean? So we proactively reached out to some of those folks too, to kind of explain the project, what we were doing, why we were doing it, and get some more information out there in case they had questions.
Wow, you guys did some extensive outreach. Like, that's amazing. I'm sure there are plenty of, you know, opportunities for people to voice, you know, here's how I'm feeling about this. Here are my concerns. That's great. That's great to know that you guys did all of that extensive outreach. And I want to ask a question that I asked you prior to the live, but I think it would be good for anyone listening to hear the answer as well.
Sure.
So how do these changes impact someone who maybe they're currently using their property a certain way, and now a zoning change has been made to their property? How does that affect them? That doesn't mean that they have to stop operating as the way that they currently are. You know, what does that mean for the future? Like if they need to sell the property or sell the business, or just are thinking of using it, or even just using it for something, a different use that maybe isn't in compliance with the new zoning?
Sure. So to start off with, this is about future development. So anybody who's operating, you know, legally, permits, that sort of thing, living somewhere, you can keep doing that as long as you want. It's, you know, it's called legal non-conforming, but it really means grandfathered. So if we do make a zoning change and whatever you have on your property isn't allowed in that table 2-2 I showed earlier, that's okay. You can keep doing that as long as you want. You can do it for generations if you want. Now, if you, let's say you own a business and you decide, or you have a tenant who owns a business and they move out, and so now your property is vacant. Okay, it's considered legal non-conforming because the zoning change happened. Prior to last night, you had 6 months to find a similar tenant. You know, basically, we had a little bit of latitude, but let's say you're producing some sort of food product, you had to go find another food product manufacturer. Or in, you know, the industrial cases that move to commercial, then you go find a commercial tenant. But after last night, the council had directed staff to extend that essentially a grace period for 2 years. So you now have, let's say you get notice from your tenant moves out, you have 2 years to find another similar tenant. And once you do, that resets the clock. So there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of being able to continue that business, continue living there, whatever it is. So we understand that, you know, every property is going to have a little bit of its own case. There's going to be unique circumstances. You know, talk to us early on. Help us. We want to help you, work with you, and figure things out. But we are absolutely not in the business of saying, oh, you know, us planners, we decided to make a map change, so now you got to shut things down. We're doing the opposite. So if folks have questions, you know, we've answered a lot of questions about it. Feel free to give me a call. We'll get my contact information out there, and I can kind of help explain that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's, you know, probably at the top of everyone's mind, just wanting to know, you know, if already have this business and I've been operating it this way for years, you know, how is this zoning going to affect me, zoning adjustment? So I think that really can help alleviate a lot of any concerns that people have. So thank you. Thank you.
We want you to keep doing what you're doing. You know, there's so many great businesses here, and we want those to continue to thrive and flourish. So please keep doing your thing.
Yes. Okay, are there any other direct impacts that you believe that these zoning changes will have on property owners or business owners or residents beyond what we've already talked about?
Sure. There's a kind of a companion project that went with this, which was, I talked about the development code overhaul, the top to bottom revision. We did some fine tuning of our development code as part of this mapping effort, this rezoning effort, to help implement those changes, do some administrative cleanup. So there was a lot of little tweaks that candidly mostly impact us in terms of our day-to-day operations. But there was, a handful of development code changes. That commercial industrial overlay is a big one. We now will allow multifamily housing in the CL zone, which is our commercial large, essentially malls. There's of course standards that go along with that, but it's one more option for property owners who maybe have somebody come in and we know retail is going through a bit of a transition period, last so many years, and do we need as much space as we have? So maybe we look at some conversion into residential, which there's a huge need for. So that option is out there. We have some reduced parking standards that I mentioned earlier. Cindy Marsh, unfortunately, my counterpart, is out, but she was the project manager for the development code update. So I'll get her information out there too, if folks have more questions on what those changes look like. We do have everything up on our website, of course, so we can send a link for that as well if people want to thumb through the 100-something pages of code update. It's in track changes, so it's pretty easy to see what was changed and what wasn't.
Wow. Yeah, that would be interesting. Maybe I can have her as a future guest to talk all about the code change.
Should love that.
Amazing. Okay, so I've got another question about individual property owners. So if someone, I own a property and I would like to get the zoning of my property changed or adjusted, is there a process through which they can make that change?
There is. As part of the rezoning effort that we did, because we're doing a big kind of one-time city-led effort, we did allow property owners that reached out to us to kind of piggyback on that. That of course is where we shouldn't be having to update on a large scale our general plan and zoning, redo that. It's kind of a one-time deal. But property owners do have options. It's not cheap, but you can apply through a planning application, which is the first step here at the community development. You come in, fill out a planning application. You can do that for a rezone and or a general plan amendment. It's about $5,000 a piece. So,
Wow.
it's not pocket change. Yeah. But what that does is that essentially kicks off a process here at the city where we, do, different types of analysis. We look at the surrounding areas. We look at how your property is being used now, what the future plans are for that area, if there's corridor plans or master plans or anything like that. So we look at a whole host of information. And then if it's recommended to basically move forward with the proposed zone change, then that would go up to the planning commission, who actually makes that decision. Staff makes recommendations, but we don't actually, we aren't able to make that zoning change. So there is a process. It happens from time to time. People come in, they have a great vision for a project, and maybe when we were doing the zoning map, we weren't aware of that vision, and they say, hey, we could do this really cool thing, it'd be great for the community. Okay, let's see if we can make this work.
I love that. I love that there's at least that ability to make that adjustment. It sounds like, there is an investment involved, so probably you'd want to be really sure that this is something you really want to do, the change you really want to make with the property, that it's going to be, worth that investment. But at least there's that ability to do it. Great. Okay, just a few more questions on my side.
Sure.
What changes do you expect to see in terms of development in the city of Stockton overall, and also downtown specifically in the next few years?
Sure. So I wrote down a couple notes on this one. Obviously housing, we're doing everything we can to get housing and more economic development, that sort of thing. Some folks may not know, but City Hall is planning on moving. We're moving to the south shore of the waterfront. It's still a couple years out, but that will have a change. Will be a little less centrally located, but the South Shore is kind of becoming its own little node of energy and government affairs, if you will. We have a lot of streetscape stuff happening. Obviously, Minor Avenue just got opened up, which near and dear to my heart. I worked on the planning application for it back in, I think, 2008 to do the plan for Minor Avenue. So you have a lot of streetscapes, pedestrian improvements, that kind of stuff going in. Channel Street, I know there's some upcoming work on Channel as well, which ties in with community medical centers. I know they have some big plans for kind of the more eastern part of downtown. And so that campus is starting to evolve, and you're seeing that, I think a lot of people have been by there, but you see every time I go by there on a walk or whatever, it seems like new work has happened in terms of construction. So I think you're seeing a lot of moving parts. Grandview Village, of course, is underway. And so you're starting to see some energy again. And it's exciting. So hopefully that will hit the tipping point with revitalization and, really kind of jumpstart more housing, more mixed use, more commercial development.
Yes, we definitely need more residential units, for all price ranges. So we would love to see more housing citywide and in downtown specifically. That's great to know that you also see more of that coming, which is what we need.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So Tristan, how can people get in touch with you if they have further questions about anything that you talked about today? They want to learn more about the advanced planning department, more about the zoning changes, just want to know more about what you guys do. How can they get in touch with you?
Sure. You can always give me a ring here at the city, 209-937-8569. That's my direct line. If you have zoning update questions, the extension is 7220. That's our little separate phone line that we have set up for that project. That's also monitored by a couple other staff in case I'm out or something. You can email me, which is Tristan, Tristan .Osborn, OSBORN @stocktonca.gov. So those are the best ways to get a hold of me. But you can also just come into the permit center. We're right across from Historic City Hall. We're at 345 North El Dorado, the little one-story building where the building permit counter is. So you can also just pop in, and if we're not in meetings, we're happy to talk to folks. So whatever works for you.
Great. Many ways for people to get in touch, ask questions, to learn more. Very exciting. And now, is there anything else that you would just like people to know, or you think people should understand about the work that you do, about the planning department, about advanced planning? Is there anything else that you want to share?
Sure. I touched on those upcoming projects, the housing action plan, the neighborhood planning, that kind of stuff. But also I just want to say, I've worked in this community for a long time, and it's really shifted here at community development. There's a lot of new staff. The culture has really shifted a lot. And, I experienced on the private side some of the, the red tape that people have experienced. And I would encourage you, if you haven't had interactions with the city lately, come on in. There's always room for improvement, of course, but we really are trying to be business friendly and figure out how to be a better city, be better servants, help out this community, and not put up roadblocks. So please come, interact with us when you can. I'd encourage it.
Thank you. That's so great to hear. And I know that the city manager made that one of his priorities coming in. So I would love to know, how that experience has changed for people trying to get permits, going through the building process, permitting, planning, all of that. I really am excited to hear that you guys are making it a priority. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Tristan, for answering all of my questions. And at this time, I would just like to remind everyone that this video is going to be uploaded to YouTube. If you're already watching us live, then you found us on Facebook. But on YouTube, we are Downtown Stockton. And we also have an Instagram at Downtown Stockton and Twitter at Downtown STKN. And now we are ready to go into viewer questions. Are you ready, Tristan? Okay, thank you. Let's get going. So first, Michael asks, do you think the rezoning will help developers build more market rate housing projects in the downtown area?
I do. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks still don't know this, but essentially in all of our commercial zones, we allow the equivalent of high density housing as an option. Yes. So it's not just restaurants and offices, you can also do apartments, condos, that sort of thing. And so one of our big philosophies behind the rezoning effort was, there's a lot of properties, it's not black and white. It could go residential, it could go commercial. Let's go with commercial. It gives more options. People can respond to the market better. And in industrial, you essentially can't do housing. So by converting industrial properties in downtown to commercial, we're absolutely encouraging more housing, giving that option. So hopefully the development community can take that to the next step.
Amazing. Great. That is awesome to know. All right, next question. This is from Sean. Sean asks, what other cities does the planning department use as inspiration for their work in Stockton?
Sure. We really look, well, it depends on how much time we have. Let's say that.
Yeah, okay.
But we try and look at, global and national best practices, but we also look carefully at other, similar sized cities. We look at the Bay Area, of course, we look at Sacramento. Some of our other valley cities, have done some great work. And so we try and look at those cities and see what they've done, what worked, what didn't work. But we try and avoid just copy pasting from other cities because every community is different. And so you can take the lessons learned from those communities, but you still have to mold them and tweak them to make them work in Stockton. So that's an important distinction, that we don't just say, oh, City of Fresno did it like this, let's literally just copy paste their ordinance and do that. It's not going to work here. You have to do everything. You have to be thoughtful about it, and you have to ask the hard questions and make it our own.
Interesting. Is there one city that you kind of look to personally that you think like, okay, I love the way that they've, laid out their planning, laid out their zoning, or is there not really a city like that for you?
I don't think so. I spend part of my time up in Sacramento, so I'm a bit more familiar with some of the efforts that they're doing there, and friends that work in planning up that way. So I guess Sacramento maybe for me, just because I'm a bit more familiar. But yeah, I think Stockton's it's its own place. It's very unique here. It has a lot of unique factors. It's oddly kind of a Rust Belt city on the West Coast with a growing population. So it's kind of a
interesting
an outlier. Yeah, it's a fun place to work.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and Sacramento has a thriving downtown, so that would be great if we could, copy some of what they're doing. All right, third question. This is from Johnny. He asks, first he says, we received a zoning map in the mail recently, and we're listed as high density residential. However, directly across the street, their property is listed as medium density residential. What is the difference?
Sure. It could depend on, and I'm happy to follow up after this and look at the specifics. It may have to do with the distinction between general plan designations and zoning. They sound very similar, but medium density residential is a general plan designation, and residential medium RM is a zoning designation. And so a lot of people get mixed up. It's hard to tell. I actually was talking to a property owner yesterday whose title company gave her the wrong zoning because they were looking at the general plan rather than the zoning. And they saw commercial, but her zoning was actually RH. And so I know it's confusing, but I'm happy to follow up, I think, with Johnny and, look at your property specifically and kind of walk through why that might be.
Interesting. The changes that you guys were just working on and were just approved, that is helping to resolve some of those discrepancies though. So maybe people will see less of those moving forward, do you think?
They resolve discrepancies on individual parcels. So the only parcels that were impacted were, for the most part, were properties that had general plans and zones that didn't match up. That was the purpose, was to match those up. So there's lots of properties out there that, maybe you're different than your neighbor for one reason or another, but it wasn't part of that effort. Some examples could be, if you're across the street, that might be some sort of a boundary, a district boundary, or, if your neighbor is potentially fronting on kind of a major arterial, a major street that is identified as kind of a commercial corridor. Maybe they have a commercial zoning, but you're on an interior street. So residential zoning makes a little more sense because you're on a small 2-lane little local neighborhood street, and they're on a 4-lane arterial with traffic day in, day out. So there's changes like that can have impacts on why you might be different from your neighbor.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And the final question that we have for now is from Elijah. He's asking, are there any plans to reduce the city's reliance on fossil fuels in regards to transportation? Do you have any insight on that?
Yes and no. I know that we have a climate action plan that was done a number of years ago, and there's been talk about potentially updating the climate action plan. That lies, I believe, within the city manager's office. I'll say in the planning department, we are very big on transit and active transportation, which is walking and biking and scooting and things like that. And so those obviously have, creating mixed use communities, smart growth communities, transit oriented developments, communities where you're able to walk and bike to some of your daily errands or your commute, will definitely help lessen that reliance on fossil fuels and automobiles. Because if you're able to take a walk down the street instead of hopping into a car, that of course has some impact. So on the planning side, urban form side, that's a lot of the work that we try and do. We're able to look at how do people get around and do that in a more sustainable way.
Oh, for some reason your sound was distorted, but you were talking about on the planning side, you're helping to determine how can people get around the city, how can they use transit to get around the destinations in the area. Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Elijah, for your question. And I believe those are all the questions for right now. So thank you to anyone who did pop in and ask a question, and for everyone who is listening. I hope that you all learned a lot about zoning, why it's important, what changes are being made to the downtown area that are going to encourage economic development here and help us to become a more thriving area of the city. And Tristan, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. I learned a lot from you. And on our side, as you know, we are very excited about the work that you've been doing. So I really thank you for the changes that you've proposed and have finally been approved. I'm very, very excited on behalf of property owners. So thank you for being our guest. Is there any closing thoughts that you might have that you'd like to say?
I hope that, as a community, we pull together and, we can focus on downtown and help it become the downtown that we all hope for and aspire to and have been envisioning for such a long time. I think we're right there on the cusp, and I'm really excited to see it happen. So anything we can do as a city to help that, come ask us and we'll do what we can. We want to see it too.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry that the sound was a little bit distorted for anyone listening in, but we could definitely hear the words that you were sharing. And yes, thank you so much, Tristan. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. If to learn more, get in touch with Tristan. Reach out to him. He's there for you. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone, and I would like to say, have a great day downtown. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.